Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for having me here today. And these are my feet, a slightly odd way to start any presentation. I say they are my feet. I should really say these were my feet. Now, as a climber, a skier, a runner, and an officer in the Royal Marines, I quite literally thought my feet were the foundation of my life and everything that I did. And it was that job as an officer in the Royal Marines that took me to this place here. This is Patrol Base Mahbub, Sangin, Helmand, Afghanistan. And I took this photo in March 2010 when I arrived there. Now, you've probably all heard of Sangin, or at least Helmand, on the news. The press quite often talk about Sangin being the most dangerous place on earth. Now, all politics aside, how did we motivate ourselves when we were out there to step out of our patrol base, the safety of our patrol base, every morning and put ourselves in harm's way? And really, we were all bright guys. We knew that the politics wasn't always that clear, but this was how we motivated ourselves. There were many children just like this that were actually no different to the children that many of you will have in this room and that I have, who were perfectly innocent. And yet they were surrounded by some pretty cruel people who were willing to do some absolutely horrendous things to them. So we forgot about the politics, and we stepped out every morning thinking to ourselves, what we're going to do is try and make their lives a little bit better and a little bit safer. Now, danger was all around us, and it was only a couple of weeks into the tour when I was shot at for the first time. And I can tell you, your heart really starts thumping when you hear what we call the crack and the thud of a bullet sonic booming over the top of your head. Now, the first time it happened, it was just one bullet, and there was no more fire. We got out of the situation very quickly, and everything calmed down very quickly. The next time it happened, we were in a full-on firefight. And it's interesting, firefights are something that you almost start to enjoy them. You start to enjoy the adrenaline rush. You kind of know where the enemy is, and you're doing what you've always trained to do. And it's something that, in many ways, I almost miss. However, these things that you see on screen, these are a different matter. These are improvised explosive devices, homemade bombs that were hidden. And we'll talk in a minute about how difficult they are to find. Now, these two were ones that my team managed to find while we were out on patrol, and we were able to uncover them and call in the explosive ordnance disposal teams, our experts out there, who were then able to, with our help, clear the area, and then they would blow those bombs up in controlled conditions so that no one was hurt. Now, I said I'd describe to you how well hidden they are. So this picture here is designed to give you an idea of the kind of pressure that we were working under every day. Now, what's going on here? We've got a man lying down on the ground. Now, what's happened is he's our front man, and what we'd do is we'd walk in single file, and you'll see next to him on the ground, he's got his weapon, but he's also got what, for all intents and purposes, is a metal detector. We called it a Vallon. And he would walk out in front of us, sweeping the ground with that metal detector, looking for any signs of metal in the ground, which could potentially be bombs. Not only that, but he's also using his eyes to see if there's any disturbed ground or anything else that looks suspicious. And in this case, what he spotted is a wire coming out of the wall to his right-hand side and disappearing into the ground. Now, you need to appreciate, and you probably see it looking at these photos, that Sangin is not like any British city. It does not have super-fast broadband. Most houses don't even have electricity. So if we see wires coming out of walls and disappearing into the ground, we're immediately pretty suspicious. And in this case, what we were thinking was that behind the wall, there would be a trigger point with a man that would be able to see where we were and at the right time set off a bomb that we thought was in front of us. And you can see the red circle there around a piece of grey, disturbed soil. That looked to us like it was a pretty obvious place where the bomb was likely to be. The ground looked like it had been dug up fairly recently. Now, normally, in this kind of position, we would only expose the one man to that kind of danger, put him that close to the danger. As cruel as it sounds, if the bomb's going to go off and someone's going to get hurt, we only want one person to get hurt, not two. However, in this particular location, we're at the crossroads of some paths, he was so exposed that we felt we needed to put a second man up to give him some protection, some cover. And when we did that, this guy actually spotted a local national, just as we had decided we'd seen enough. This guy spotted a local national coming towards him, and we decided to stop and question the guy. The guy was what we would call a fighting age male, so anywhere between the ages of 14 and 40, and obviously local. We call them fighting age males, and we'll generally, if we get the opportunity, stop and chat to them and try and find out where they're from, where they're heading to, what they're up to, and see if they're any sort of threat to us. And after speaking to this guy, he told us that he was heading up to the buildings that are in the background of the picture there, going to see his family, which we thought was a little bit odd because we knew those buildings were abandoned and had been for quite some time. Now, we decided we'd seen enough. We weren't going to expose ourselves to any more danger. So we came back to our patrol base, pulled back, and the following morning we called out the explosive ordnance disposal team again and spent the following day clearing that area and making it as safe as we could for them to do a fine search of the area and clear any bombs that they might find. And so this is what they found. Where that red circle is, they found nothing but a wire running underneath it. And the wire that the guy is looking at while he's on the floor there, that disappeared off to the left into a ditch, and they never found where it went to. The wire that they did find in that red circle was coming to a bomb that was directly underneath the knee of the guy kneeling down. And I took that photo so you can see how close I was, and I'd been stood right next to him. And the wire was heading straight up to the houses where our local national had said he was going. Not only that, when we had drawn back the night before, and we looked at the photograph of the man we had spoken to, and we compared it to our intelligence database, we found out that that man was the local Taliban commander's little brother. So in case it hasn't sunk in, we're pretty certain that guy was just going to a trigger point for a bomb that one of our guys was knelt right on top of, the other guy was lying right next to, and I had pretty much been stood right on top of. And we had absolutely no idea whatsoever quite how much danger we were in. And so from that moment onwards, we suddenly felt really quite endangered. Now I'm going to fast forward a few weeks here, a few exciting weeks, lots went on. I say exciting and sad. There are a few deaths in between as well. This is to the 16th of June 2010. This was the day I got injured. Now, the blue box you can see on the map there is the patrol base Mahbub that I was in command of. I had about 30 men under my command there. And the picture that you saw previously was in the series of paths that you can see just down to the left-hand side of that patrol base. So it was just literally a few hundred meters away from where we were. And our plan this morning was to go to a farmstead up on the hill, just to the southeast of the little explosion sign there. And that farmstead was owned and run by a little man in his 70s. He lived there alone, generally minded his own business. It was just a small holding, a few vegetables, a few chickens. However, all those buildings directly north, they were the Taliban's stronghold. We had no patrol bases in that area, and that was where the Taliban used to launch all their attacks from. It's where their headquarters essentially was. And his farmstead sat right on the hilltop between them and us. And so what used to happen was the Taliban used to try and take over his farmstead so they could use it to watch what we were doing and basically harass him quite a lot. So we just used to every now and again pop up there, make sure he was okay, see if there was anything we could do for him and offer him what help we could. And that's the plan for this morning. So we left about 4:30 in the morning while it was still dark, and the reason we would do that was because we had night vision goggles, and that meant we were able to see in the dark, see any potential dangers, and essentially just get a head start on the Taliban who didn't have the same technology. So around about 5 o'clock in the morning, the sun started to come up, and at that point, our night vision goggles are useless. So we stop and we take them off. And we don't literally just take them off and move on again. You'll all have experienced going from dark to light very quickly, and your eyes need time to adjust. So actually, we stay in a defensive position for about 10 minutes, just to let everyone's eyes adjust to the new light. At that point, we set off again, and we started moving towards the farmstead on open ground, not on the tracks that you can see. What we'd do is we'd actually zigzag across open ground in very random movements, essentially trying to make it as hard as possible for the enemy to predict where we were going to go and lay mines in our path. Now, what happens next, I'm going to describe to you, but it's everything else that goes on from there, I call the ultimate team event. And so I'm going to spend quite a lot of time talking about this and staying on this slide and the next slide. As we were walking, I can remember seeing the silhouettes of the guys in front of me. I was 7th man in patrol. I could see them silhouetted on the hilltop. And the next thing you know, everything goes into slow motion. I'm flying through the air. I'm looking up at a very grey dawn sky. And I literally have time to think, oh, fuck, it's me. They're the words that went through my mind. And then I landed with a thud on my back on the desert floor. And this wasn't the first explosion that I'd been involved with. It was obviously the closest one, but I'd seen other explosions. And I knew that there would be absolute chaos all around me. And so instinct kicked in, and the first thing I did was shout out to the lads, it's me, I'm hit. Because we didn't know who else might be injured. There'd be dust everywhere, potentially, and I was blown quite a long way from where the bomb was. And then the next thing I did was grab my radio button, because I was the commander on the ground, and started sending reports back to the headquarters. Now, I remember it being a matter of seconds by the time the first guys got to me. I knew my injuries, pretty much. I knew that I'd lost both my legs. I didn't quite know to what extent, but I knew they'd both gone. I knew I couldn't use my right arm. And so that's what I was trying to report on the radio at the time. And what actually happened was it took a couple of minutes, 2 minutes roughly, for them to get to me, because I'd been blown quite a long way, and the medic, who happened to be the man behind me, started to make a run for me. But luckily, one of the Marines next to him had the presence of mind to grab him by the scruff of the neck and hold him back. And the simple reason is this: if there's one bomb in the area, potentially there could be 2 bombs in the area, or more. And the last thing we needed at this point was any more bombs going off. And so even though they could see me and see the state I was in, these guys had to get out their metal detector and methodically clear a route to me. I think you'll all agree that considering the pressure they were under, the discipline that they took to do that is pretty phenomenal, the presence of mind that they had. Now, what needs to go on at this point? Well, obviously you've heard, the first thing we need to do is get people to me to start giving me first aid. Now, if you sever a single femoral artery, the textbooks give you 3 minutes before you die of blood loss. I was missing both my legs, my right leg above the knee at this point, my left leg just below the knee, and my right arm, for all intents and purposes, was gone. It was kind of there, but it was just mush. So I'm losing a lot of blood. I've just told you it took them 2 minutes just to clear a route to me. So what they did in the next 60 seconds to give me that first aid was nothing short of a miracle. But then the second in command, a corporal on the ground, he has a whole host of things to think about. Because as well as making sure that I'm getting the first aid that I need, we're now sitting between our safety, our patrol base, and what I've just told you is the Taliban stronghold. And this bomb's just gone off, leaving a big dust cloud everywhere, a loud noise, and it's showing them that there are troops on the ground and they are vulnerable and in danger. So he's then got to start thinking about how he's going to make sure we're safe while they're giving me first aid. Not only that, but he's then got to start talking back to the headquarters, back to our patrol base, and start arranging a casualty evacuation plan to get me out of there, get me to a safe point where we can meet up with a quad bike and a trailer and get me on there and get me back to that patrol base as soon as possible. So you see, this guy was stepping up into my role, and he had to deal with all of this, and he did it absolutely superbly. While all of that was going on, there's lots more going on at different levels. Our patrol base was talking back to the company, which is the next level up, their headquarters. They were talking to the unit headquarters. The unit headquarters, which is still in Sangin, was talking to the casualty evacuation staff back in Camp Bastion, which was about 100 miles away in the middle of the desert. They're then preparing the casualty ward to receive me, as well as launching 2 helicopters to come and pick me up. The reason they launched 2 helicopters is because we had 2 different sorts out there. We had the British Chinook helicopter, which was what we called a MERT, and the Chinook, if most of you have probably seen it, it's a helicopter that's big and long and got 2 rotors on. It's very quick in the air, but it's slow to take off. But because it's so big, the MERT basically carries a mini surgical team on it. The other helicopter was the American helicopter, which was the Black Hawk. It's a much smaller helicopter, but it's quicker to mobilize and get into the air. It's a little bit slower in the air, but it just carries 2 paramedics on it. So literally what they do is they launch both as soon as they can, and then they're just in a foot race, if you like, to see who can get there first to deliver whatever medical assistance they can. So while all that was going on, we come back to my level where I was, and the guys were getting me back to this room here. This was just a little room within our patrol base. This isn't me on the stretcher, but it is the same room and the same stretcher that I would have been lying on. And the guys around me, or the guys around that guy were the same guys that would have been around me. I'm just going to talk you through some of the characters. The guy with his head down and gloves on really looks like he's treating the Afghan local there. That's Tom Morgan. He was the medic that I mentioned, made the dash for me. And it wasn't the first time that he put his life in danger to go and rescue someone and give them first aid. A very brave individual. So he literally would have been there next to me. Jim Wright is the guy with the head torch on, whose face you can see, helping Tom there. Jim was the guy that came out on the quad bike to come and pick me up. So he was in what we called the quick reaction force. Now, Jim calls that pickup one of the most surreal moments of his life. He's heard on the radio what's happened, and he's just got his equipment on as soon as he can. He's sitting on that quad bike, and he's left the patrol base to head to a meeting point with a couple of other guys in support of him. And he's expecting to find me, him and I had become pretty good friends over the course of the tour, and he's expecting to find this friend pretty much in a dying mess on the floor. And what he describes is coming up to me, and I was unconscious. It turns out after the guys got to me and gave me the initial first aid, I became unconscious, which you probably all think is an absolutely great thing, because you don't really want to be conscious while you're sitting there missing 3 limbs. However, it turned out not to be such a great thing, because it happened before they were able to give me any morphine. And if someone becomes unconscious before you give them morphine, if they do then become conscious, they're considered too high risk to then give them any morphine afterwards. The morphine might kill them. And what happened when Jim arrived, the sound of the quad bike woke me up, and apparently I was lying there dead straight, and my eyes just popped open. I looked up at Jim and went, "Hey up, mate, how you doing?" The human body is an absolutely incredible piece of kit. At this point, I wasn't feeling any pain whatsoever. Jim's response in the shock was just, "I'm fine, mate, how are you?" At which point, Jay Calvert, who was the guy with Tom Morgan giving me first aid, and is actually the guy with the second head torch, whose face you can't really see there, Jay absolutely scolded Jim for being an effing idiot and asking such a stupid question. But anyway, they very quickly got me back to the patrol base. And as I said, the human body is absolutely incredible. I'm not the only person with a story like this. There are many like it. And if this happened to any of you, I promise you, your body would kick in and do the same thing. Adrenaline is released, endorphins are released, and you do not feel any pain. I was conscious all the way back to the patrol base. I was talking to the guys. Every now and again, I was trying to make a joke. I'm not a funny person anyway, so they weren't really laughing. But I was just there, able to have conversations with them. I was also hit with a whole mix of strange emotions too. I'd been with my girlfriend at the time for about 8 months at that point, of which 3.5 had been out in Afghanistan, so I hadn't seen her much. And I remember having this thought that at least I'd get home to go and see Bex. And then immediately I was overrun with guilt. Guilt about the fact that how could I be thinking about that when actually I was leaving my men behind in this absolutely god-awful place to carry on putting themselves in this danger. So again, what goes on in the mind is very funny, or very strange, sorry, I should say, in these moments. We've described a whole lot of things at one end, the helicopters being launched. We've described what was going on at my end, at a very low level. In the meantime, there was also extra support coming from our company headquarters, which I mentioned. And that was a point where Buck Ryan, the company sergeant major, arrived on the scene. Now, Buck, who's now a regimental sergeant major in the Marines, he is the biggest, ugliest Royal Marine you have ever seen. He literally has a head like a cow, the teeth a lot. However, for the last probably 25 years, wherever there's been a conflict that the Royal Marines have been involved with, Buck somehow seems to have been there. And in a moment like this, there probably wasn't another man that I would have wanted on my shoulder next to me. And he was essentially stood, while they were treating me, he was stood where I am in this photo, taking the photo. He had a radio on and he was giving us the messages of what's going on. And so we got this message that helicopters would be landing in 5 minutes outside the patrol base. The guys were out there, they were with their Valens again, clearing a landing site. And we got that message, and so everyone started putting the clothes back on me. They started putting a helmet and a body armor back on me, strapping me into the stretcher and moving me around to the front of the patrol base. All of that took about 2 minutes just to get me around there. And then at that point, once we were there, Buck gave us the message, helicopters will be landing in 7 minutes. Now, you don't need to be a genius mathematician to realize that 4 minutes has just disappeared there. And this is where my adrenaline and my endorphins absolutely failed me. Because over the previous couple of weeks, I'd listened to 2 Royal Marines die over the radio where they had been injured. We were going through the same routine that I've just described to you now, and in both cases, there had been issues with the helicopter landing, and we'd been listening to their vital signs, and we had heard their vital signs go from good and strong to slowly weakening, and neither of them had made it. And all of a sudden, I had this thought that actually this could happen to me. I started panicking what was going on with the helicopters. The pain kicked in, and I just decided that I had to hold on. And I remember turning around to Buck, at this point crying and just saying, Buck, come on to the Chinook with me, and whatever you do, just tell them to put me to sleep as soon as possible. And the next thing I know, the Chinook landed, and they ran me on there, and I grabbed the first person in a flight helmet, who I assumed was a medic, grabbed him by the scruff of the neck and just screamed at him, put me to effing sleep, put me to effing sleep now. I remember my head rolling to the right-hand side, looking out the porthole window and seeing the ground move as we took off, closing my eyes, and I woke up 3 or 4 days later in Birmingham. Now, so you're probably guessing from Afghanistan to Birmingham, a whole load of surgery's gone on there. There was a plane launched from Bryce Norton just to come and pick me up. They had me back in Birmingham within 24 hours. Not only that, but when I woke up in Birmingham, I had my dad and my sister at the end of my bed. Doesn't seem that incredible, except for they both live in Dubai. And also my girlfriend and my mother, who both live in the southwest in Devon with me, were both there as well. And so all of these people were all there. I shouldn't be standing here today. If I was to suffer those injuries on the doorstep of any A&E ward in the UK, the chances are I'd probably die. These people pulled off an absolute miracle to keep me alive. I'm led to believe somewhere in the region of 600 people, all told, were involved in this over that sort of 3 or 4 days, getting me there. And they were separated by continents, bad communications. Again, we've not got fiber optic broadband knocking about here. We're talking about old-fashioned radio signals, digital radio signals for them to communicate. Having an A&E facility in the middle of the desert that's equipped to give me the treatment they needed. They pulled off an absolute miracle. And I've always said this, and it just happens to tie in very nicely to what Steve was just saying there. My belief is that the only reason they managed to do that was because they all had one simple, common goal that they could attach an emotion to. And that was get Jon White home alive to see his family. One common goal. I spent just 27 nights in hospital. These were the injuries that I was left with. As you can see, double above knee amputee now, so they had to bring the amputation higher above my knee on the left-hand side, and a single through elbow amputation. And you can see that actually the legs, although they're nice and long, which is a good thing for amputees, in terms of the scar tissue that was left, they're not particularly pretty. And I'll discuss some of the issues that they've given me over the last 5 years later on. But after 27 nights, I got out of hospital, and then I started at Headley Court. I was injured in June. This video was taken in the August time, so we're looking about 9 weeks post-injury. And this is Bex and I in a welfare house the weekend after I've been given my first set of prosthetics.
That was really impressive.
These are what we call stubbies, so you can see there I'm about this tall on them. We use them to start off with because you've got lower center of gravity, so it allows you to build up your balance, build up all the key muscles again. And this photo was taken in the end of October, so we're now looking sort of 3 or 4 months down the line, and I'm standing tall for the first time on a set of sea legs, which are legs that are very similar to the ones that I stand here in today. And you can see the amount of effort that it took me just to stand up off the floor earlier. And you know, I literally didn't take any steps on this day when I was wearing these legs. Literally just standing up was a challenge. The thought that further down the line I could end up wearing legs all day, every day, and giving up using a wheelchair was just absolutely beyond me. But it was just a case of having the belief that was given to me by other examples, and just getting there, little goals at a time. As my rehabilitation progressed, I went out to America to go and see a specialist clinic out there in Oklahoma. Now, luckily, the UK...
Keep your eye on the ball, accelerate through.
Luckily, the UK isn't particularly well equipped or experienced to treat guys like myself. And I say luckily because it means there aren't too many people like me about.
Mark had trouble with this too. It's all right.
So I managed to find out through some friends about this clinic, and they're just world leaders. So I had a bit of a fight with the Ministry of Defence, and eventually managed to get the funding to go out there. And it was really life-changing for me, not only in terms of what they did to me prosthetically, but the training they gave me. They recognised that the world is not a perfect clinic with nice flat floors and grab rails everywhere. That the real world is a bit different. And so they did things like get me out onto a golf course to walk in long grass, short grass, uphill, downhill, through sand and off steps at bunkers, but all within a sort of relatively safe environment, I guess. Now, I absolutely love this photo, and the reason I love this photo is for a couple of reasons. First, it's the first time I started running again properly, and I was a big runner beforehand, and you can probably tell by the look on my face, I'm pretty happy at this point. But actually, it's more about the people who are stood or running either side of me. And I'm going to just talk you through them. The guy with the long hair in the red T-shirt, he's called Cameron Clapp. Cameron is a train wreck. A couple of days after 9/11, Cameron got drunk and fell asleep on a railway line out in America, in California, and woke up missing 3 limbs. That incident absolutely saved Cameron's life. I mean, the first clue is the fact that he was falling asleep drunk on a railway track. Not only that, but he got his first driving under the influence charge when he was 8 years old. And a couple of years after his injury, his twin brother Jesse died of a drugs overdose. Cameron used to be into drugs, and he used to drink a lot, as you can probably guess. This accident was what sparked him to change his life. He's an absolute freak of nature when it comes to using prosthetics. He's not the most intelligent man in the world. We actually have a saying that Cameron is too stupid to realize things are impossible. But what he achieves is absolutely incredible. You know, if Cameron was here, you'd say, Cameron, walk off the stage without using the steps. He would just go and do it, and he would do it successfully. And so he's a great mentor to have, because he's the one that sets the target for the rest of us to try and reach. He's the one that sets the goals for us. The other guy is a guy called Trevor. Very different story. Trevor was born with deformed knees, and at 13 months, the doctors decided to amputate them. So he's grown up with this all his life. And again, it's an absolutely inspirational character. He's hoping to go to Brazil, to Rio, to the Olympics next year to be a powerlifter. And he works full-time as a gym instructor, not in a specialist disabled gym, in a normal gym. And I remember meeting him about 18 months ago at a amputees conference. And the weekend beforehand, one of his clients, he'd been training them to get prepared for a half marathon. And on the day of the event, the client said, you know what, I'm not sure if I can do this. And so Trevor just decided to put on his running legs with no training whatsoever and just went and ran the half marathon with them. So again, absolutely incredible individual. And what I find with these guys is their peer support is absolutely priceless for me. Although I'm a few years older than both of them, they've both been living with this for a lot longer than I have. And through them and another larger network, what I found is there are very few experiences that I'm likely to have related to my prosthetics and my amputations that someone else will not have already experienced. And so with modern social media and communications, they're always at the end of a phone, whether it's by Facebook, WhatsApp, or email. And any questions I have, any moments where I'm feeling down, I always know that I can reach out to these guys and they'll be there to support me and help me through it. And I think that's really essential. And I remember it in the Marines as well. We used to have a saying, if you're ever writing something for the first time, it means you're probably doing something wrong, because nothing we do is ever that new. There's always someone else out there who's been there and done it before. And if you can be brave enough just to stick your hand in the air and ask for help, someone out there will have the answer for you. Not only that, but they will absolutely love giving you that answer and love the opportunity to help you. Moving on then, I decided to take things a little bit further and learn to snowboard. This was really a brilliant piece of negotiation by me because it was taken about a week before this wedding photo. And the deal was, I said to my wife, or my then fiance, if I go out and learn how to snowboard, we can then go back out to Colorado and go on a honeymoon snowboarding and skiing together. And that's exactly what we did. Just out of interest, so you know, the guy in the red jacket, he was one of my instructors out there, and it was run by a charity, the event. And essentially what they did is you had 3 instructors per person. You had one who was very hands-on, helping you stand up. You had one who was sort of a bit more technical, stepping back and looking at what you're doing, trying to give you some advice. And then you had the third person, who this guy in the red was. He was what we call a cruiser, and his job is to stay about 20 meters behind you and just make sure that no one else from behind you on the slopes can come racing up and crash into you. So moving on then, this photo fills me with a lot of pride, again for several reasons. One, it's the last time that I wore my blues, my number 1 uniform. And one of the things I enjoy about it is looking at it. My children in the future would have no idea that I was missing all my limbs when they look at this photo. 2, obviously, I'm sitting there with my beautiful bride, Bex, on my shoulder. And 3, I was also lucky enough to have the Royal Marines Corps of Drums there, which really took an already fabulous occasion and really made it very special for us. Now, I realized that I was going to have to leave the Marines. I couldn't stay in my condition for the rest of my life. There are other people who are more deserving of the jobs out there. And honestly, I probably wouldn't want to. I'd find it very frustrating. But that left me with 2 things I needed to consider. Firstly, what my new job was going to be. I joined the Royal Marines when I was 19 years old. Essentially, because I joined as an officer, which is a graduate's role, but I did it when I was 19 as a non-graduate, I always felt like I couldn't do anything else other than be a Royal Marines officer. I thought about leaving the Royal Marines beforehand, but was too scared to do it. I'd taken on mortgages, I'd bought a couple of houses, and I didn't think that I had what it took to make it in the civilian world. And so I decided to stay in the Marines. I loved it anyway, and so why not stay with what I knew and what seemed to me like the safe bet. Also, the houses that I owned were completely useless for anyone missing limbs. I had a little 17th century crooked cottage, which had steps in and out of every room, and just would have been a complete nightmare for me to live in. So I'd been accommodated in military accommodation. Leaving the military meant I needed to get some new accommodation. So my plan was simple. I'd buy a plot of land, and I would design a house with some help, and I would project manage building that house. So the idea was that Bex and I would get a house that we could live in with a hopefully growing family for the rest of our lives, but also I would get a new set of skills that I could then take into the civilian world. Now, the results were absolutely beyond my dreams, not just in terms of the physical result of the building, but actually in terms of the experience of going through and project managing that house build. It was, quite frankly, the most stressful 2 years I have ever experienced. I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. I was learning everything as I went along. But at the end of it, I realized that even though it went a little bit over budget, a little bit over the timeline, and I still did manage to complete it. And so it gave me a huge amount of confidence that actually I did have a little bit more to me than just being a Royal Marines officer. And we were lucky enough along the way to be blessed with George, particularly fabulous because at one stage I was told that I wouldn't be able to father children. And George has since been joined by his little sister, Pippa. So what am I now doing with myself? Well, initially the thought was I'd use my experience building the house to set up a construction business. And I did that. I called it the White House Future. I then ran a few projects for about 6 months and realized that actually, if you're not an experienced builder with all the right contacts, it's a really hard trade to move into. And at the end of about 6 months of pretty hard work, I had about £1,500 to pay myself. So I realized that probably wasn't going to be a long-term plan for me. But at the same time, some friends got me involved in leadership consulting. I'd started doing a couple of talks, started out at my old school, and then got invited along to a few more talks to do. And some friends got me out to Montenegro to go and help them run a leadership course out there. And I really enjoyed it. And I think the reason I enjoyed it is, A, because I was doing the bit that I enjoyed the most about the Marines. It was the leadership, it was the developing of people. That's the bit that I really enjoyed, being with the lads and helping them grow. And I used to always get a real kick out of that. And two, I was kind of using what I'd spent the last 10 years doing, using the bit that I knew about and I was experienced in, instead of the building side of life, which I was using my previous 2 years, not the best experience in the world doing. And I realized that actually I could do this far more effectively. And so what I do now is I come out, I do talks like this to conferences, I run leadership development programs, whether it be on a mountainside in Montenegro or Romania, or whether it be conference room based for smaller teams and boards. And I also do one-on-one executive coaching. And that mix has been absolutely great for me because in terms of quality of life, yes, I spend some time away, but I kind of enjoy that. It was part of the Marines that I enjoyed, getting some time away and seeing other parts of the world. But I also get a lot of quality time at home too with the family. And so probably far more than I would if I was in any other job. And not only that, I then get the chance to see people grow and develop. And as part of that, I decided to write a book on leadership. Now, I'm really not a guru on leadership. I've watched a lot of leaders within the Marines. I've done my bit of leadership. What I realized was to write a good book on leadership, I needed to get out there and interview some people who really were. And so I've called the book Who Leaders Lead. It's an ongoing project at the moment, and I've been lucky enough to interview this guy here, some of you might know, Kofi Annan, the Supreme Allied Commander of NATO forces, a guy called General Breedlove, the First Sea Lord, the head of the Royal Navy, John Carter, who's the CEO of the Travis Perkins Group, and a few other people as well. And it's still developing. I'm still looking for some other high-level leaders in the political world and in the business world. So if anyone's got any ideas, just give me a shout. I'm always looking for more inspiration on that. This book could be an absolute failure in terms of sales, and I really wouldn't care whatsoever, because really what it's doing is it's giving me the chance to sit down and talk about my profession with some of the greatest in the world at what they do. And so even if the book fails, I will still have learnt a hell of a lot from it, and it will help me moving forwards. Now, you're probably thinking, wow, there's a lot of good things going on, and that all happened over the last 5.5 years now. But around the middle of last year, I realized something wasn't quite right. I was really suffering with my right leg. I was getting a lot of pain. If you remember all the skin grafts I had, they started breaking down and opening up into wounds a lot. And I kind of ignored it, as you do. I carried on with my working life. I carried on running around after my children. And then I was running a leadership program, or a team building program, for the London Business School, and pretty much collapsed at work one day. I got home, got into my wheelchair, having not touched it for over 3 years, and pretty much, well, I did. I started crying when I got the wheelchair down from the garage and climbed into it. My wife wasn't home at the time. When she got home and found me in the wheelchair, she said, right, that's it, you're going to hospital because something's obviously wrong. I got in there and found that I had a massive infection in my leg, and when they took an x-ray, they found that perfect pointer bone, what we call heterotrophic ossification, or a bone spur, growing out the bottom of my femur there. Now, this isn't particularly unusual. It's no different to you breaking a bone and the bone trying to heal itself. It's just normally you'd expect to see it happen within the first sort of 6 to 12 months post-injury, and often it happens with amputees. The bone is trying to heal itself, but obviously for me, it's got nothing else to attach onto, so it just grows in a random direction. So this really knocked me for 6. I thought everything was going swimmingly, and all of a sudden you find yourself back in a wheelchair. In January, I spent 3 weeks in hospital, 4 weeks, in hospital, having some fairly massive surgeries. The first one was 6.5 hours. The next one was 13 hours. You talk about an incredible team. The surgeons who did that 13-hour one were exactly that. And then some more follow-ups. And even then, actually, we soon realized that part of the surgery hadn't gone to plan. So I sort of carried on for a bit, did a bit more work, and then in July I had to book in for another 2 weeks of surgery. Had that, got out of hospital on a Wednesday, and on the Saturday evening I was back in hospital again because an infection had set in during that operation, and had to go back in for a third bout. And so in total I've ended up spending about 9 weeks in hospital this year. And the reason I tell you this is just because that's the way life is. Life isn't fair, life isn't unfair. It's just a series of experiences. And all you can do is accept them and just move on. And I'm going to talk about that a bit more now. Now, there's 2 parts to this picture. The first is the story behind it. Bex and I got quite a lot of help in the early days after I was injured from charities, and so we decided we wanted to do something really special and challenging to try and raise some money for those challenges, for those charities, to give something back to them, and also for us to feel like we had achieved something again. And so I came up with an idea of completing a bucket list event for me, the Devizes to Westminster kayak race. Now, for those of you that don't know, it's 125 miles. It happens over Easter weekend every year, and it's a world-renowned kayak marathon. You try and do it in one go, so within about 24 hours. The fastest teams will do it in 17, 18 hours, the slowest in about 30, or there's a 4-day event where you can do it over the long weekend. We decided that we were going to go for it and try and do it in the sort of 24-hour race. Now, Bex had never kayaked before, so she had a challenge, and, I've only got one arm, and funny old thing, that left arm, years beforehand, I'd already had a shoulder reconstruction on, so it wasn't exactly in the best shape anyway. So we decided that it was stupid enough to meet our criteria. And we started training and getting on the water, and we felt like we could do this. Now, you're probably all sitting here looking at this picture going, my God, Bex has got really ugly and bold. That's not quite the case. We realized 6 weeks before the race that Bex was pregnant with our first child, George, and we decided that doing a kayak marathon probably wasn't going to be the most sensible thing for her to do. So at that point, this guy here, Lee Waters, jumped in the boat with us. Lee was my right-hand man out in Afghanistan. He was my troop sergeant. So he's about 10 years older than me, and he met Bex and he met my mother before we went out on tour. And he said to her, "Oh, don't worry about John. I've been to war loads of times. I'll get him back safely." Well, 3 weeks into the tour, it was Lee that got shot 3 times, once through the cheek, once through the hand, and once through the ankle. And it was me that had to go out with the quad bike, like I described earlier, and pick him up and get him home safely. So Lee had kind of a few guilt issues going on about the fact that he had left me out there. Completely misplaced, but they were there anyway. And when Bex and I had started training for the race, he decided he wanted to be a part of it, part of the support crew, and used to come along and run along the bank as a bit of safety for us, because we did have a habit of falling into the water every now and again. So Lee jumped in the boat with me 6 weeks ago to prepare for it. He had done the race twice before, but almost 20 years beforehand, and we managed to do a total of 119 miles training together, total, aggregate. So we hadn't even done the race distance in all of the training that we had done. And we turned up to that start line with absolutely no right whatsoever to finish the race. And we got going with it, and everything went well. By the end of the day, sort of 12 hours into the race, we were only about 2 minutes behind Sir Steve Redgrave, so we thought we were doing pretty well at that point. But as the night set in, and we couldn't really see where we were going, we had a couple of long legs, we were starting to feel tired, we didn't see our support crew for a while, our pace really dropped off. And 15 hours into the race, in the middle of the night, our team manager, Dave, came up to us on the bank and said, "Guys, your pace has dropped off so much, there's no way you can make the 8 o'clock, the 8 a.m. cutoff at Teddington Lock on the Thames." And the reason that's key is because that's where the Thames becomes tidal, and if you go on there after a certain cutoff point, you're then going to be paddling against the tide, and it's deemed too dangerous. So on this morning, it was 8 o'clock in the morning was the cutoff time. Now, I still haven't worked out whether Dave knew what he was doing or didn't know what he was doing, but the result was this. Lee and I got really angry. We pretty much didn't talk to any of the support crew for the rest of the next 8 hours. And for that 8 hours, our pace went from 4 miles an hour to 6 miles an hour, so a 50% increase. And we made it through Teddington Lock at the 8 o'clock cutoff. And we finished the race in 28 and a half hours, achieving for us the impossible dream. Stephen Redgrave, by the way, didn't finish the race. He finished after about 87 miles, where he had to give up due to exhaustion, along with a third of the other entrants. So for Lee and I, it felt pretty good to achieve the race, but it was more than that. I talked about Lee's feelings of guilt. Well, with a third of the race not even completing it and us getting through there, this was a real line in the sand for Lee. All of a sudden, he realized that I was back to my old self, and although I was missing a few limbs, I could still achieve the kind of things that I could beforehand, and he really had nothing to feel guilty about whatsoever. The second part to this picture, the 3 rules of kayaking. These were taught to me when I was at school by a teacher called Mark Neenan, who's a geography teacher, and he used to take me climbing and kayaking and train me for running. So he played quite a big role, I guess, in shaping me during my teenage years. And the 3 rules are quite simple. Rule 1, as you can see there, is keep paddling. Rule 2 is keep cool. And rule 3, you've already heard it, shit happens. Shit happens. When it does, refer to rule 1, keep paddling. Now, obviously, that helped us get through this race. But I can honestly say, if you change that word paddling for going, this is a strong metaphor for life that has helped me get through everything up until now. Keep going, keep cool, and shit happens. When it does, keep going. Next then, this is about leadership. Spike Kelly was my 4th boss in the Royal Marines. I was about 22 years old when I was working for him. He was in charge of a company, so about 150 men, the logistics company for the unit, and I was his second in command. So I was his right-hand man, I guess kind of a COO, if you like, at a different level. I did all the day-to-day running of the company whilst he dealt with all the strategy. And And I can't remember, actually, the details of this story. All I remember is walking into him, really upset with myself one morning, going, Spike, I'm really sorry. I've really messed this up. And I was really quite panicked about it. And this is what Spike turned around to me and said. He just went, John, is anyone dead or is anyone about to die? It's not that big a deal then. So what's the problem? And let's see if we can work a solution out. And I tell you, as a 22-year-old feeling the pressure, this was one of the most empowering pieces of leadership I ever experienced. And it's something that I've really held on to for the rest of my military career and for the rest of my life. Let's put things in perspective. What's going on? Because actually, once it's happened, it's happened. There's not a lot you can do about it. What we need to do is concentrate on finding the solution. And we can only do that if we stay calm and concentrate on finding the solution. And then my final slide then for this afternoon. I took this photo about 2 weeks before I got injured. And it's in our patrol base Baboob again. And that arrow there is pointing to a guy called Mahmoud Saeed. And we knew from the intelligence database that I talked to you about earlier that Mahmoud was the local bomb supplier in our area. He most likely supplied the 2 bombs that you saw the pictures of earlier, and he most likely supplied and handled the bomb that did this to me. Now, we work under British rule of law out there, and what that means is there's nothing we can do about what we know unless we have the evidence to support it. So unless we caught him in the act or with some sort of evidence, we just had to let him go again. And that happened on 3 occasions during this tour. This one where I was there and 2 other occasions where I wasn't there, but my troops were. They met him, but at the time, they didn't have the evidence they needed to arrest him and take him in. So I joined this meeting, and then at the end of it, had to shake his hand, smile at him, and let him walk out the gates of that patrol base. And 2 weeks later, this happened to me. Now, the thing is I now hold absolutely no resentment against Mahmoud Saeed whatsoever. I mean, how could I? You look at what I've just talked about for the last 20 minutes, how amazing my life is right now. I don't know whether my life would be what it is now. In fact, I can tell you my life wouldn't be what it is now had this not happened to me. I don't know what it would be like, but I just know it wouldn't be what it is right now. And I'm very grateful for a whole range of things that I got right now. You know, forget the beautiful house, it's the beautiful wife and the 2 children that are the absolute apples of my eye. It's the job that's got a fire in my belly again, that's given me a chance to, you know, in a small way, make a difference to small elements of the world. These things are all absolutely fabulous. And they've only occurred after this bomb blast has happened. So actually, how could I hold any resentment against him? Because he's actually given me this opportunity to be here right now. In fact, really, if I met him tomorrow, I could shake his hand and thank him, because without him, I couldn't be here right now doing what I'm doing, and I absolutely love it. Now, this didn't happen overnight. You know, one of my friends who was on that tour with me, he finished with our troop, and he went off and joined the Special Forces. And I remember him going out on a tour to Afghanistan, and I sent him a stupid text. This was quite early on, after I was injured, saying, make sure Mahmoud Saeed's on your hit list. And so there was obviously a rage and an anger there for a time. But it was only really once I started to recognize everything that was good in my life and everything that was going on that I realized that what I needed to do if I was truly going to be happy and truly going to be successful and get on with my life is I needed to let go of that anchor. And that's what forgiving that man has done for me. And it took me about 2 years to get there, but I can honestly tell you it's one of the most relieving things that I've ever done, letting go of that anchor and forgiving that man. And not just forgiving him, but forgiving myself as well. Because as I've said, I was partly responsible. I was probably more responsible than anyone else for me being there at that moment in time. And so I've had to learn to forgive him, learn to forgive a few others, and learn to forgive myself. And at that point, I'm now a much happier person. And my road to success feels like it's really going somewhere. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Thanks, Gabby.
Thank you, that was amazing. Thank you. Quite rightly, John. They're on their feet.
Thanks very much.